Good evening. You are listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have from the Great Midwest, RDV. And I also have here from Central Florida, the young 20-something, whatever we call him, Professor Pixel. Tonight, we're going to have a very special broadcast. It's our typical Sunday night review. We're going to be doing 1981's Excalibur, what I consider to be basically one of the gold standards of sword sorcery, serious sword sorcery, as it were, between this and Conan. That set off a nice little several year period in the 80s for even B-level sword sandal films, some of which we've already covered here, including Gore and a bunch of others, which with a bunch of people will mention, and more still to come. One of the reasons why we're doing this is it's one of the more favorite films of one of our fans here, DVD Daddy. DVD is a big supporter of the program here, the Extreme Movie Show. He's very generous with his time retweeting stuff. From my understanding, his physical media collection, which I totally implore anybody to have, always have backups. I want to say it's what 20, 30,000, if I remember correctly, and he ran a theater too. So this is a guy that's just really supportive, and every now and then you get somebody that just has a strong passion for this kind of stuff, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of why we do what we do. So wanted to take this film and take a minute to say, get better. He's had a little bit of a boo-boo, so he's healing up. Everything's good. But Excalibur, guys, let me start off by saying, before I get you all's first takes on this film, is that for me, I haven't seen this since probably the mid-'80s. So after RDV, I know you and I had covered Dragon Slayer a while back, then some goofy ones. I forgot how good looking of a film this is, and all the things I love in a movie with on location filming, the set pieces, the seriousness of the acting, I think is tremendous. This is a movie that only has, I think, one general flaw to it, and that's this. If you're not familiar with the death of Arthur, as the title is called, the King Arthur and all that crap, there's a lot of juice behind it, and it depends on if you know the British version or say the French version or maybe even the Spanish interpretation. This is one of those things where you realize, oh, it's about a guy, knights at the round table, all this crap, and then you realize, shit, there's a lot going on. And if you don't know it when you start watching this film, it might come across to you as just the collections of scenes, and you go, what the fuck is going on here? I mean, but you can definitely tell that this is a movie that took itself very seriously, and I certainly appreciate the effort. And after a rewatch, after about 30 plus years here, I think it still hands up too. So let's go around the horn. RDV, is this a first watch for you? What's your initial take?
This was a first watch for me, and it just felt really slow. I did like the props, I did like the swords and stuff, and reading up about the behind the scenes, how they filmed it, and having the guys who carry those freaking lights around so they can make the armor shine. Pyrrhus, because Arthur's men are supposed to be merry men, or I guess you're a very noble compared to everyone else had like the grungy, kind of dark armor. This, like I said, this felt like I was in history class, and they should put a movie on here. Like, I'd rather just go put my head down to sleep.
Yeah, I know it's not your type of style. We've talked about that before, like especially like on Tuesday nights when we do, like, say, an '80s action film, like say a canon classic or something. Whereas I gravitate sometimes more to some films like this. I think if they're done well and not full of themselves. So definitely a pretty interesting take there.
For me, the biggest problem for me is in the very beginning is when Arthur pulls the sword out and then puts the sword back. It's like, what the heck?
Well, he has to prove that he did it.
Well, Pixel, again, you're the young one in the group here too. Did you know back in the day in advanced placement English, you had a selection of stuff? And so, I mean, for me, I jumped right to this because I don't want to be assigned like Canterbury Tales or some crap like that. I went right for the good stuff too. What's your initial take on this? First watch, of course, I'm assuming.
Yes, it was a first watch, and I am kind of disheartened that it took so long for this to become first watch, because it was a great film. I mean, when we talk about sword and sorcery, King Arthur is the classic. It is the standard. So for them to make film, okay, there have been King Arthur films before. A great one is partially in my little PFP here, but no, this movie is a serious telling of Arthur's life from beginning to end, and it feels grand and epic as it should. All the actors do a phenomenal job, and by the end of it, you do feel like you in a good way, that you have lived a life.
Yeah, and I think too, and I try not to get too serious when it comes to all this stuff, because really it's all about enjoying something, having fun, and talking about it. But I mentioned before how there's this common theme that seems to go out in a lot of different cultures and human type stories, and it's just variations on a theme. With these cultures of how they're expressed and how they're documented, and that's something fascinating about human nature. And one of that is summed up very well by a guy named Joseph Campbell, where he talks about like the hero's journey. And we think about like the Greeks and the Romans, but more the Greeks than the Romans, because the Greeks are, I guess, nice and Romans are more assholes, or depending on which camp you're in when it comes to that. Those are the people that first kind of really documented some of these things that seem to be popular in Western culture. And I think this movie kind of reminds me of that hero's journey that you would expect to have, like the 10 or 12 labors of Hercules, wherever it was. And I think here, RDV, your point earlier about kind of expecting to maybe be a sword and sorcery film because of everything we watched, and you realize, no, this is more literature put on film rather than that. And it's everything that...
I was gonna say, I didn't expect sorcery. I didn't expect this to be in but I expected to be... Like I kind of had a feeling it was, because I've seen parts of this before. I had a feeling it was just gonna be like a history lesson.
Yeah, and as a British, you're doing it, so you're gonna get that, right?
It's the life and death of King Arthur. So
yes.
And I really kind of stick away from things where they have people cheating on one another, and so that's kind of really irritated me. It's like, I'm your best friend, but I like your wife. She's mine now. And then the best parts are with Merlin.
Let me tell you about Dark Shadow. Sorry.
but to me, that was like the strength of the movie is Merlin. Merlin interacting with Uther, and also interacting with Arthur. And then you have Morgana.
Young Helen Mirren. Whoa.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that was my favorite parts. Everything was pretty much just like, let's introduce this person. Okay, next scene. Let's introduce next scene. Nothing really had time to breathe, even though it was a 2-hour and 20-minute movie.
And you bring up a good point with that too, because again, if you don't know a lot of some of the connections, it's hard to say, oh, they did this well because of the transitions. And so, and this isn't necessarily a knock on modern day films, although it certainly will sound like one. When movies like this were attempted back, say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there's a bit more of a higher standard, I think, just in general, what we would call a classical liberal education about things that you certainly don't get today, or even though the access is easier, it means usually less people have it. So with the British audience too, attempting something like this, I think that's more understood, that they're going to have a slightly higher understanding of the story because it's so integral to their culture for hundreds of years. And the title of itself, I want to talk about. It's not Excalibur, which is the sword. It's based off of the death of Arthur. And you raised a really good point when you're like, man, I didn't expect to see the one lady kind of get raped at the beginning, if you want to call it that, and then the cheating. It's a story about humans and their desires and falling prey for it, and why it should be sad, because that's what happens. You have treachery. Guinevere herself is an idea of, oh, was she really innocent? Was she complicit? Did she really turn on him? Was she betrayed? Was she the instigator in all this? You look at Merlin, and even though I think the guy was phenomenal and really chewed up the scenery, is he like an evil force because he's whispering in people's ears? Is he a younger guy that learned his lesson and had a chance to redo it with Arthur and saw all this coming? You're not quite sure of each person's motivations, but I think they're supposed to represent a particular part of human nature, including Guinevere and the cheating that you were mentioning before.
Yeah, honestly, Igraine being raped. Rape's a strong word for that. She was tricked because she willingly gave herself to Uther,
who she thought was her husband.
It's
Morgana, but Morgana, damn right, she could see through the spell. There's no way that could not. The way she was looking at him,
that was kind of cool, though.
Yeah,
but Morgana also, she thought her father was dead. In that moment, she already was seeing it in her head. Daddy's dead. What do you mean? He's right there. Yes, go away. Yeah. We're going to go. Screw in the next room. Bye.
but you know, like I said, the parts with Merlin, you know, and he's speaking to Arthur. Arthur, he's like, "Can you make Guinevere fall?" He's like, "No, no, no. I already spent 9 moons because your damn father. That's how you were born."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love the types of humor. Percival, hi. All right, see you later.
What do you mean?
Well,
He
as
just
a
comes-
first
he-
watch for you,
He comes out of
re-
nowhere. He came out of nowhere like Randy Orton.
Well, he did kind of come out of nowhere, but I loved his growth. Percival's growth in this film. Like he's from nothing, and he suddenly made a knight there to defend.
I want to
his
know about
king's
him.
wife.
I want to know about what drove him to become a knight.
Well, I mean, honor.
Everyone else is doing. I want to be.
Everyone
cool too.
everyone else was silent because they did not have faith in Guinevere.
Yeah.
Which, well, yeah.
Wow, she's a whore.
Well,
it depends on how you look at it, and you know,
You're married to
Again-
someone else, and then you do it with your husband's best friend. Oh,
Yeah.
he won a
so she's
match
supposed
for
to be
me in my honor.
flawless.
let me lead you. Let
Is
me
she not,
show
is she
you
not
dark
supposed to go
shadows.
through her own trials and learn things
Well,
too?
aren't they supposed to be the noble knights? Then
Okay, noble isn't. You're just not noble. Noble implies that
noble, you have honor.
you overcome
Which
something.
There
and
is
all
no
that, which is the
honor
whole
in
telling
cheating
of the story.
on your lover.
But that's what Rob's saying. A lot of this story isn't just like sword, sorcery. Oh, we're just going to battle. It's about humans. They're all very human. I went ahead and said that this is pretty much pinnacle of sword and sorcery. At the same time, it's the sorcery is very light, and I liked that. The lady in the lake being basically a hand to grab the sword and
That's
show the
awesome.
sword. That's
Yeah,
great.
and it's a great image
simple.
too. It's so simple, that greenish light or whatever they put on it. It's like that's all you need to do. You don't
I'm
need to
just
see
saying, I would
yeah,
have
no.
liked that better if Morgana had a hand with Lancelot and you know, getting on with Guinevere.
I thought for a minute maybe they were going to introduce that. I was looking for it, but I didn't really notice anything that really pointed that out. So, because Morgana wanted her son, a son that she would make with the king, her brother, awkward, to be king. He would not be king, but it's. You talked about modern movies, Rob, and actually the one film that comes to mind that I'm thinking of is Dune. Because Dune has a very similar epic feeling.
The Rock, yeah, a little bit.
I think Dune. The knock on it is how do you capture it on film, and some of the negatives that I've heard, even with our recent review of Dune, was that it was just really pretty and it doesn't really do anything. And I think obviously anybody that's a hardcore Dune fan, if you forget certain specific things about the Dune culture that's set up for you, it's really just a story about oil back in the day. And I think the author himself, Stephen, talked about it too, and how you have a resource. In this case, it's spice, but for us, it's in the real world, it's oil, what it represents, and everything too. What do you have when you're back then and you're in feudal times? You've got your territory, you've got your word and honor, and if not, well, you fight, and whoever's right wins. Whoever wins is right, I should say. And so very early on, we see them all going to battle and with horses and stuff. And RDV, I'll kind of go. We're used to things getting sped up so much and big quick cuts that here, when you see a camera just kind of showing a few people on horseback with what looks to be heavy ass armor, even if it's not, I'm going, that looks a bit more realistic in plotting, and it's more realistic in terms of how armor itself had developed over the years. Whereas now, everybody could swing a sword, could do everything. They're not breathing or huffing or puffing. You could tell physically that they're laboring. And so when they're like falling off their horses, I'm like, damn it, that's a real person falling off. Even if that's stunt armor, let's say, it's still mud. The opening shot of just the horses breathing and the smoke because it's so cold out there, I'm like, that's all you got to do. It draws you into everything that we've talked about, whether it's Willow or anything else that's filmed naturally. That just sucks you in.
Yeah, the very first battle they had with Arthur before he just got the sword and he had to go save his castle. He first meets Marianne also, or Guinevere. Yeah, too many freaking BBC lores. I like that. I actually thought that was really good, a really cool fight scene.
Yeah.
I was just glad there wasn't any trolls. That would have been like the Two Towers.
Well, honestly, it's interesting you mentioned Lord of the Rings because, of course, we all think about that as being the gold standard for any of that stuff. And actually, a lot of the prompts and everything from here kind of came from the development of what Lord of the Rings took a long time to develop into, and and all that. So that's what this movie was supposed to be at some point, and it ended up just being Excalibur, which again is certainly not a bad thing. And you're like, damn it, those Britons have got a monopoly when it comes to really kick-ass kind of middle-aged fiction, because they were pretty much the center of the world. And a lot of people would argue that too, but again, in terms of Western culture and the fact that it documented, London was one of the big teeming city for the longest time, supposedly one of the best ones in the world. I mean, you could argue that with other ones too, but in terms of its reach and breadth, absolutely. And even back to the Romans and all that, going all the way up into England and all the boundaries and how things have moved over the years. You almost get a sense of that when you're watching this, because when they fight, and he's like, if you yield, you'll have everything from from the rivers to the oceans, and the flowery language that they use in here too. You have to listen to it, but you can understand what it is they're trying to say, and it just sounds not like they're overdoing it. And that's when you have talent like Patrick Stewart, even though he's bearded here. I'm like, Patrick, you weren't always that shirt pulling a different alternative Captain Kirkish type person, Jean Puke retard, as I called him back in the day. I mean, you watch him, you're like, damn, he's good in this.
Yeah,
a lot of guys in here are just really good. The whole cast is phenomenal.
My boy Neeson.
Yeah, I didn't see him. I didn't recognize him. Was he towards the end? I saw.
Yeah,
Stewart.
and he's
Stewart from the very going.
He's the tall one.
That's the other thing. When they all have their.
He has the Legend of the Green Knight. It's Gawain. Gawain.
Go on.
No, RDB, I know you weren't the biggest fan of this, but again, between this and Conan,
I actually like the Sean Connery, the Green Knight, better than this. Same with the Magic Sword. Those are my speed. This was kind of like we're giving you a lot of information and not giving enough time for it to settle in.
Okay. So what would be the gold standard of sword and sorcery for you?
Sword and sorcery, for sword fighting, it's always going to be Conan the Barbarian.
Okay.
Sorcery, I'm trying to think. Well, I should like the Magic Sword for sorcery. I still got to watch more movies that actually have sorcery in it.
Yeah, we realized there's not very many of them. That's not a goofy, campy type thing, and that's why Dragon Slayer I still thought was pretty good too. What were you gonna say, Pixel?
Well, I was just gonna say sword and sorcery is supposed to be the genre. So, but with that being said, this is pretty much my gold standard now. Because
what was it before?
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that, really. Lord of the Rings is definitely top of the list, but this holds just a little bit in that field. I love the Lord of the Rings. I'd sit down, watch all of them anytime that I could. But when it comes to sword and sorcery, the genre we've been exploring for months and months and months and months now, this is top tier.
I think Lord of the Rings was, when it came out, because of the way it looked at the time and all that, people were like, hey, this is a different way of looking at films with how Peter Jackson put it all together. And while I thought they were solid and sometimes entertaining, they're a bit kind of like lightish for me. And some people will argue that the Tolkien's works in general, just being kind of Christian in nature and all that, were very lighthearted and totally different than, say, like a Michael Moorcock or other ones too. And so there's some different camps, even with British sword and sorcery, about which one's more appropriate. This one feels a bit more adultish to me and realistic. Maybe it's because of the themes involved. You certainly don't necessarily have all that in Lord of the Rings. And so while those are enjoyable, there's something a bit more visceral about this. And I think that's why it's easier for something like a Lord of the Rings to be, watchable, rather than this one where you're like, man, this is pretty hardcore. This is pretty intense. And, but it's not one you sit there and go, oh, I'm going to have fun watching it. Because to your point, RDV, it's not supposed to be, it's not there are no happy endings if you want to
No,
look at it that way.
no. I
There's
want
just endings, I guess, or appropriate ones, but not happy. No happily ever after crap. And I think that was a big surprise.
yeah, for this, I would say Lord of the Rings has the more entertaining story. This has the better production value. There's no CG.
I'm going to agree with you on that. I mean, I know Jackson likes to film a lot in New Zealand where he's at, so there's some amazing shots in there. They kind of kept it somewhat simple. I think when you go back and rewatch it, sometimes when you're watching, you get caught up in going, yeah, this is too much CGI. So even though like the storming of the castle seems almost Monty Python-ish by nature, where you're like, really? We got a guy taking a ladder and trying to climb up, and then here comes Arthur, and he's got Excalibur, and he's chopped away at people. But I'm like, well, what would it really look like?
And then you got Merlin just whispering into the horse's ear, "Hey, I need you to pull this."
Thought he was going to hit him with the staff too.
I thought he was going to yank Arthur off, because Arthur had the hook. I'm like, he's going to die. He's going to get impaled if that horse runs.
No, Merlin to me is the best in here. I like his look. You know why? And here's a way of describing it: Lord of the Rings style versus Excalibur style. He doesn't look like a little wispy, joke of a little bent over frail old man. I'm not saying he's a virile stud, but he comes across as a man. He comes across as somebody goofier that had been watered down, like say in a Disney old school movie or something. I mean, you buy him as being a threat in his own way. He knows things that like Arthur doesn't. When you look at Arthur's not a big dude, but what I liked about him is he looked like a boy. He gets the armor and his attitude changes a little bit. He's a bit more forceful. He becomes a man. So I thought that was good. And then of course we see him when he gets older, how he's aged and everything too. And I thought, okay, that's appropriate. The boy king, or whatever you want to call him, boy becoming a man and then dying.
I like the main actor from the Sword of the Valiant, the one else we just did, the one that was going against Sean Connery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought
There's a Gabriel Byrne sighting in here too earlier on. I'm recognizing because he's got this crazy kind of eyes, and I'm like, oh, he's Uthgar or whatever the guy's name at the beginning. I'm like, oh man, they had everybody in here that was up and coming for the most part. Let's talk about the end.
Okay.
He's dead, Jim.
Let's talk about Guinevere, the sword,
No,
getting it back. How do we feel about that?
Listen,
Does she atone for her horrendous life decisions by doing this? I mean, that's the whole point in the story is how you want to interpret it or how you want to tell it at the end.
Yeah, I mean, she basically locks herself away in a nunnery. I was caught. There was a sword between me and my lover, and so I'm going to go hide away for the rest of my life. But no, it's to atone because she
fucked up.
Well, huh?
Because she fucked up.
She realized, yeah, she made a mistake.
Yeah, and I think that it's hard for me to say that I think she deserves that.
I think so.
But Arthur, even Arthur,
don't make a vow and break it.
Wait, even Arthur at that point, he and her, if he lived past this, he would want to be with her. But
I don't think so.
They say that. They literally say that.
It's just pillow talk.
Talk is cheap. You said you wanted to be a knight, but
I'm you're a little heartbroken because of that, because they do love each other. It was passion that took her, and it's a shame, but they did love each other in their way, and
she loved every minute she was writing Lancelot, right?
It was.
If you're really hardcore cynical like I am, you could tell that Gwen. I would say in this presentation, the reason why Guinevere didn't love him, even though she came to love him, is early on when he's injured in the battle and they meet, and she's dressing his wound over by the tree, and they got that little fountain there and all that. It's he goes to he's just enamored with her, and he leans in, he goes to give her a kiss, and she does that coy thing like he it's not time yet or whatever. And I'm like, oh, if a woman shies away from you, then it's all over, So Yeah, she's got you. And so I kind of look in here as that, yeah, she knows she's screwed up and everything too, but
I'm just thinking Arthur.
he has to die at the end, because
Yeah.
that's the story. It is supposed to be like a tragedy. It's not supposed to be
Yeah.
whatever. And you can't have a hero unless he pretty much dies at the end, because that, if without that emotional impact where you go, yeah, he was innocent, he was pure of heart in his own way, he overcame a lot of stuff, and he got fucked at the end, and that's called life. And so they
Well, he
have to
didn't
kind
get
of
fucked
do
at
that.
the end.
Well, I
That was kind of the problem.
recommend that he just goes with the younger model.
Well, I'm just, it's interesting because, like I say, different cultures have their own slight versions on this and spin-offs. It's fairly,
Well,
accurate to the literature, but again,
And-
part of the interpretation of it makes you go, "Oh, she's a bitch," or "Oh no, she had to learn the lesson too." People want to say that it was tough being a queen at the time.
I gotta say, did anybody else find it strange that they're mentioning God, but at the end you have people like Morgana and Merlin magic wielding?
No.
I don't know. I mean,
It's like I know they want to make him noble, so they believe like God, but then he, at every turning moment he's like, Merlin, do this for me, Merlin. So I was just like, really?
it was just, I think, a belief in a higher being sort of thing.
Well,
because
Christianity
again,
was during this time period. Christianity was like one of the established faiths they had throughout through Britain.
Yeah, and different groups and all that too.
Yeah.
And it's unless you're a scholar, it's hard to keep track of all of it.
So, like I said, I understand this is supposed to be imaginary. This is supposed to be not a real thing, a fairy tale, but or also a moral lesson.
Well, that's why, in a way, I still, between this and Conan, I might give the slight edge to Conan for this, and this will be my final thoughts, and we'll go around here. At the beginning, not Robert Forster, that's the sheriff in Twin Peaks, but I think was it Michael Smith, Robert Smith or something? He's the guy that plays Conan's dad at the beginning, who, he's making the sword with his wife's there, and young Conan's there.
Yeah.
And then they have that whole talk up there by themselves about, you can't trust women nor beasts nor men, but this steel you can trust. I kind of like that because it's just a bit more cynical and real worldy. We're getting what the lesson is at the beginning, and we're seeing Conan go through those trials and learn it too. So again, that appeals to me a bit more just because of that. But one thing they both have in common, definitely, besides being great films and great looking films, and the soundtrack is just incredible. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's one of the strongest things about this. They both rely a lot on that and in practical effects. It's crazy how 40 plus years later we're talking about things that may kind of be the gold standard, and we're still looking for something, if they ever make them anymore, that would do it. And yeah, they had all the knockoffs too, the Beastmaster and Yor and a bunch of others that we haven't even really gotten into. And it's like, I think there's an audience for it if you treat it right. And I always thought, even with Lord of the Rings, as big as it was, I went back to Conan, I went back to Excalibur in particular because of its historic context of this is how you should do this type of a movie going forward. And I don't think you're going to probably get that anytime soon. RDV, you got some final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Watch the movie at least once. Give it a chance. You may like it better than I did, but it's cool seeing Patrick Stewart in a role other than freaking Picard. Dear God, that's all he does now. It's his money ticket, I guess.
What do you mean? He plays that one playwright on Frasier that thinks that Frasier is his boyfriend.
Anybody watching this show or watching us right now has probably never watched Frasier. They watched here.
That's funny.
Like I said, it's got a great cast. Does it pass the Meg test?
What do you stop it? Just stop. Come on now.
What the hell's the Meg test?
The Megs was a movie that came out that checked all the boxes for being a big box office thing, slick production values, nice multicultural cast, horrible writing, horrible directing, acting, dumb writing, everything about it. A lot of money was made on it, a lot of money was spent, and it's trash. So, it's got to be better than that for it to even get consideration. So of course it passes the Meg test. He's doing it just to trigger me a little.
I know. It is because this actually they came up with had a budget of $11 million and walked away with 35, so it made a little bit more.
Pixel.
It's
hard to take you seriously when you start off with the Monty Python bit, but you know what? Monty Python was smart enough to make fun of it because, again, that's just how it is. And Monty Python, I mean, if you got that kind of sense of humor, the British sense of humor,
We
they
just need a
definitely know all
sequel.
about it.
I want
What's
Excalibur
Bring
3.
me your finest shrubbery.
Rob, I need Excalibur 2. Let's get on the sequel.
But the finest shrubbery was Excalibur all along, because this film is fantastic. Everything of King Arthur, this is the top tier of it. Nothing that I've ever seen compares to this. That is what I'll say. Thank you. Good night.
Until next week.
No, Jim's comment there, I'll just comment on and we'll call it a night here. I think it's pretty accurate. I think it sums up what I've been saying too. He says that he should rewatch it someday, that because when he was a kid, he thought it was boring, which RDB is what you're saying, and he didn't understand a lot of what was going on in the past the fighting. And it's true. If you don't know, that's the big flaw with this, is that, and we all kind of mentioned it together, is that there's a lot of great scenes. There's really no transitions from it. If you have no idea of the backstory, you're just watching the scenes going, okay, this guy likes that chick. Oh, this is the one dude who does that. Oh, I guess this is supposed to be a magic spell, but I don't know because there's no CGI. Okay, there's a sword that I guess is powerful, but I don't know how, and all that. Yeah, it's almost kind of like surreal. It's a little mind trippy, which I kind of like, but it does require a little bit of backstory. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a bit of a slog, because you're like, okay, the guys walk in and the chick's doing this, and the old lady and the spiders, and you're gonna be like, what the fuck? But as a kid, you're like, wow, this is really cool looking stuff. But yeah, it's definitely interesting, but it's definitely up there, and it's why we decided to cover it here. But that's for DVD Daddy. Like I said at the beginning, get well, DVD Daddy. I know you always like to retweet us. I appreciate that. And again, any of you guys out there listening, watching, I appreciate the fact that you guys let us know that we exist. We do take reservations, if you will. If you got a particular film that you want request, we'll take a look at it too. I know we have New York Ninja on the short list and a few others too, so keep them coming, guys. I mean, we're here just to kind of talk about them, whether we like them or not, and just spend a little time together doing that. So for RDV, for Professor Pixel, and everybody involved here at the Extreme Movie Show, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, have a good night, stay extreme.
For the king!
And it's not going to be Excalibur 2 Electric Boogaloo, I promise you that.
I expect you